Hello and welcome to today's HDI webinar. We're very glad you've joined us for Employee Experience is Everything, using real-time employee data to optimize agent experience and delight tech support customers and end users. I'm Tim McElgan, the Editorial Manager and Principal Analyst at HDI, and I'll be your host for today's session. A few housekeeping announcements before we get started. If you have any technical difficulties during the session, please hit F5 to refresh your browser window. If you're on Mac, that'll be Command R. If you need assistance, please click on the yellow help icon below the slides. We do encourage you to ask questions at any time during the discussion. To do so, simply type your questions to the Q&A window in the side of your screen and hit the submit button. Due to time constraints, we'll probably only be able to answer a limited number of questions today, but we'll get back to you with responses as soon as possible after the session. Additional resources related to this discussion can be found in the resource list widget, which I don't think we have today, so you can ignore that part of it. And today's presentation will be available on demand shortly after the completion of the live event, and you'll receive an email and reminder once that does become available. And finally, thank you to NextThink for sponsoring today's discussion. Let me introduce our panelists today. Roy Atkinson serves as CEO and Principal Advisor for Clifton Butterfield LLC, a business advisory practice, and is one of the top influencers in the service and support industry. In addition to being named to many other lists, he was named one of the top 50 customer service experts of the decade by Nextiva, one of the top 150 global customer experience thought leaders and influencers by Survey Sensum, and one of the top 10 contact center or CX contact center influencers you need to follow by Shelf. His blogs, presentations, research reports, white papers, keynotes, and webinars have gained him, that's a little tough for me today, gained him an international reputation. He delights in bringing his years of experience to the community. Roy holds a master's certificate in advanced management strategy from Tulane University's Freeman School of Business. Charles Arahu is I don't think I got that right, Charles. I apologize. I'll give you a chance to correct me when you come back on. Is the principal analyst with Intellix. Charles has been researching digital transformation since long before it became the uber buzzword of today. He's an internationally recognized authority on the digital enterprise and leadership in the digital era. He advises technology companies and enterprise leaders on navigating the transition from the industrial age to the digital era, and is now focused on helping digital era leaders prepare themselves and their organizations as two macro trends, the primacy of the customer and the primacy of the algorithm, collide, ushering us into what he calls the new human age. In addition to his work with Intellix, Charles is the founder of the Institute for Digital Transformation, the author of 3 books, and most recently the co-founder with his wife of the MAPS Institute. A sought-after keynote speaker, Charles has been quoted or published in CIO, Time, Information Week, CIO Insight, Network World, Computer World, USA Today, and Forbes. And finally, Ian Atkinson. I am really having trouble today. I apologize to my presenters and to the audience. Ian Atkinson is a senior software product portfolio leader with a proven track record in a dynamic, growing, and global environment. Ian's currently Vice President of Product Management at NextThink. He speaks frequently on digital experience, ITSM, ESM, automation, AI, and business technology futures. Ian's presented at many industry events worldwide, including the Gartner Symposium, Pink Conference, SDI, SITS, ITSMF, Bright Talk, and at HDI's Service Management World. When he's not working, Ian can be found spending time with his wife, kids, and dogs, messing about in boats, and sometimes DJing, and very rarely, he says we should be grateful for this, very rarely strumming the ukulele. Welcome all. I'm really, really pleased to have you here with us today.
Great to be here.
Great to be here, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
And just to point out that all 3 of us have last names that start with A.
Spooky.
Good point.
Oh, no.
So I guess I'll have to change my name. I'll have to change my name to A-McElgan. McElgan. Final quick note before we start the discussion. Tech support teams serve both external customers and internal end users. For convenience, we're going to refer to both external customers and internal end users simply as users during the conversation. So, gentlemen, let's set the stage for today's conversation by getting your views on the state of tech support employee experience. Charles, we're going to start with you, followed by Roy and Ian. Organizations of all types and sizes continue adapting to the new normal in terms of balancing their plans for tech support teams' remote, on-site, and hybrid work. I'd like you to share some of your insight into the current state of tech support employee experience. what hasn't changed much, and where has the employee experience changed drastically and or permanently? Charles?
So first of all, this is a little bit like old home week. I mean, Ian, Roy, and I go back for many, many years at we used to be in-person conferences. So it's good to sort of get the gang back together to have what I'm sure will be a lively and interesting conversation. And this is fascinating for me because we're talking about the employee experience in this very specific space of how are we affecting it from the tech support or the agent experience. And I think that it is interesting. The obvious one, of course, is that, for most organizations, that meant working from home, which was something that was completely unheard of just a couple of years ago. But I think that it would be a misnomer or a mistake to look at that as the primary thing. Because what I think is really happening is that we're seeing a massive, and I think the work from home movement, where it wasn't just obviously tech support, but it was everybody was working from home, caused this sort of ripple effect where our end users, our customers, became much more adept at using technology. I would argue, and I'm curious what others think of this, but I would argue that has resolved some of the low-hanging fruit. People became, they had to become much more self-sufficient, and they had to start taking greater control and ownership of it. So it has changed the dynamic of the type of support. But I think the other major things we're seeing in the last 2 years, sort of independent of, but running simultaneously, we've seen an evolution in the technology. Much higher levels of data acquisition and data. Obviously, NextThink is a part of this movement where we're having just a huge amount of data about the end user experience. And that is dramatically changing how, what we're doing from a support perspective. And then the last piece of this is once you have all the data, now you have the ability to put this whole layer of intelligence on top of it, where we have things like chatbots or conversational AI agents, and other forms of intelligence that are doing auto remediation. And again, changing the nature of the type. And I think what it's really driving to, and these are the parts that I think are permanent changes, is that the ability to have the best answer is not what's going to make the best agent in the future, because either it's going to be automatically remediated and resolved, or it's going to be provided as with a conversational agent listening in and saying, hey, try this answer. I think what it's really going to be is sort of back to the roots. And I know Roy's going to have a lot to say on this about empathy and the ability to connect on an emotional level and to make someone feel seen and heard, because those are going to be the things that become all important. And what the historical foundation of it being about your technical savvy, I think actually becomes more diminished over time because of the technology. So, but I think that's up for debate. So I'm really curious to see what Ian and Roy have to think about it.
That's great. Thank you, Charles. Roy, can you weigh in on these fascinating topics for us?
Sure. And a lot of what Charlie said, I totally agree with, and I've seen some of the same things happening. When the rapid move to work from home happened in the pandemic, everybody scattered out of the offices and went home. IT's ability to respond to it was amazing. In most organizations, IT really stepped up and got things done. And one organization that I know of, for example, a relatively small organization, wound up having to provide 500 laptops in a week for people who were going from home. And think about that from a small organization's perspective. Just acquisition, delivery. Okay, we can't meet people in person. How do we get these laptops to them, right? So they had to set up a protocol to get these things picked up and so forth and so on. Really amazing stuff. And it really elevated the perception of IT support to a great deal. And so now it sort of becomes a question of sustaining the end user's trust and appreciation that was gained during that period of hyperactivity, as it were. And to a certain extent, it puts a little bit of extra pressure on the support staff to maintain that level of service and level of respect from the end users that they're dealing with. Also, though, as Charlie said, that the technology has changed a great deal. And one of the things that's happened, and we predicted this back a few years ago, we saw this coming, because of the increased ability to resolve things automatically or via self-help and let the users become more self-sustaining. what's happened is the complexity of what's being presented to the analysts at the service desk has gone up dramatically. All the simple stuff is going or gone, and the more complex stuff is winding up in front of the agents. And there's tremendous amount of technology that they have at their disposal. There's more analytics at their disposal. As Charlie mentioned, you've got this AI-driven in-ear or on-screen coaching that can happen. All of that, information is being fed to them, which adds to their complexity. They're dealing in a more complex world themselves, as well as having to deal with the complex problems that are coming to them. So in that respect, it's changed, but organizations are working very hard to try to figure out how to maintain the human connection in that. Where does the empathy happen? Because so much is going on electronically, digitally in their world. How do you preserve the human connection? Because people appreciate it. That's one of the things also that people have indicated their appreciation for, is when they are able to interact with people live in person or even remotely, when they're able to interact with a human, their satisfaction and their experience goes up. So it's trying to walk a tightrope.
Yeah, that's great. We actually just wrapped up a survey on the contact center side of things, just asking agents, what's your level of confidence in dealing with multiple channels? And I think that the reality, the new normal, is reflected very strongly in there, where the vast majority say they're either confident or very confident in their ability to handle multiple channels. Ian, if we get your viewpoint on this broad question.
Sure. It's tough being third as well, isn't it? Especially following from Charles and Roy, because they'll have covered all possible angles, and I don't want to just be repeating the things they said, but I'd like to make a few points where I think things have changed. And you know what? I think it must be really tough at the moment. If you're working in a service desk, frontline, help desk type position at the moment, things must be really hard at the moment. Let me explain why. Firstly, as mentioned, and you can't not talk about it, COVID, work from home. Okay, so that was a big change. And we talked about how IT did an amazing job at keeping people and businesses running. The trouble is we're beyond that now, or kind of, hopefully, let's say hopefully we're beyond that now. We're seeing the daylight at the end of that particular tunnel. But what's happened is those employees, those users, wherever they are, there's been a big expectation shift from them as well. They've realized, hey, I can work in my home office, and if I don't like where I work, I may go and choose to work for a different company. I might choose to do that. So suddenly the level of service and support and assistance they get becomes more important. It's no longer enough just to fix broken things quickly. Because now you're dealing with relationships, and you're dealing with people's pleasure in their work, and you're dealing with them staying at the company or them choosing to leave. And then, of course, you've got that pressure, and you've got the guys and girls in support, those on the front line, and they're taking issues that come in, and they have to bring together an understanding of the context, use multiple tools, have understanding and insight into what's been going on, have empathy into what's that person's role. What's it like for them when that Zoom call failed and it was a vital sales call and they were under more pressure than they would have been in the office? And that sort of empathy puts greater pressure, I think, on those working in support, in tech support. And that's really tough. Now, there's lots of opportunity. And as Charles said, there's great things coming in that can help address that. But I think the big shift really is we went through the wave with COVID, but what we've come out with is a situation where we really have to raise our game and change our thinking to go into the future.
That's great. And that segues beautifully into the next question. Again, we'll start with Charles on this one. Many of the changes we're talking about are driven by the evolving expectations on the part of customers and end users. Can you talk to the audience about what you are seeing in terms of those changed expectations?
Yeah, so this does continue on kind of the conversation we've already been having, and this isn't new. I wrote about this in my first book a decade ago. Mm-hmm. That there is this shift in what customer expectations, and I use the term customer, but the end user, internal, external customer, what those expectations are. And I think it's actually sort of coming to a crescendo. In fact, I and this is probably my fault, I didn't really follow up to make sure you guys had the right intro, but I actually left Intellix 2 months ago and launched a group called the Digital Experience Report. So it's a hybrid industry newsletter and analyst firm. And part of the reason is that what I've been seeing over the last couple of years is this primacy of the digital experience as the driver of enterprise value. And it extends across every dimension of it, from the customer experience as the outward creation of value to the employee experience, to what Ian's talking about internally, in that organizations are now fighting on multiple fronts. They have to not only go and fight to get customers, but they have to fight to attract and retain employees, because employees are becoming a massive differentiator in your ability to compete in the marketplace. And the one we're not talking about much, but mark my word, we will be, which is this, what I call the ecosystem experience, or the ability to compete for partners, because your partnership network is now an incredibly important part of how you deliver services and the customer experience that you're delivering in it. And they're all interconnected, right? And so from the impact on the customers or that end user and what's happening for them, you have these two sort of conflicting trends. The first is that we're all being completely inundated, and our experiential expectations are being normalized by things like our smartphones and all of the different websites we have, and this modern technology. And this, like I said, this started a decade ago, but it is absolutely coming to a head, particularly when that line is completely blurred. See, it used to be that, I had the technology I used in my personal time at home, and I had the technology that I used when I went to the office and worked. When suddenly that is all one in the same place, one in the same experience, where there's no differentiation between those two modes, then it brings the difference in technology into relief. Now, I'm suddenly interacting personally, and then I have to go to work my work stuff, and it's like completely, from the 80s or something. Then I immediately go, why it can't this company that I work for deliver technology that actually works and is as seamless as what I'm using here on my phone? So you have that expectation that's happening on one end, and then the second conflicting sort of thing is that the technology that we have to use now to deliver services as an employee is growing increasingly complex. It used to be that your average employee used a single system. It was one big monolithic system that did everything they needed to do. And the average employee now, there's a few different studies out here, but the average employee on a given day is touching 10 to 15 systems now. And they all have to interact, they all have to connect. And so while everything I said in that opening is true about the fact that sort of the low-hanging fruit is being handled and the nature of support is shifting, what I'm sure that everyone is going to be listening to, and what they're probably thinking as I was saying that, is it's also getting more complex, because the situations they're running into are not, or less, how do I do XYZ, something I can go get off an FAQ or off of a support site. It's more about, I have this system and I'm trying to make it get data into this system, and that integration isn't working. Or when I do this, the workflow that I'm expecting isn't happening. And these become incredibly complex challenges to solve, because it's not just a simple, hey, how do I use it? So I think you have these two things intersecting where the experiential expectations are rising, but the underlying complexity that is necessary to deliver on those experiences is increasing. And you put these two together, and it's sort of the perfect bad storm of creating an employee experience that can actually compete, to Ian's point, to help you compete for those employees that are becoming incredibly fickle and can go anywhere they want because there's such demand.
Yeah, going back to the research we just wrapped up, just about 40% of agents responding to our inquiry said that they were handling between 10 and 15. They had 10 to 15 interfaces that they had to switch among in order to get their jobs done. Ian, can you talk a little bit about how things are changing from the expectation viewpoint of the end user?
Yeah, that's interesting about the 15 interfaces, isn't it? And if one of those doesn't work, that particular user might contact the service desk and say something's broken, but they won't contact the service desk and say, look, I have to keep switching between 15 different interfaces. I have to keep pressing here and clicking here. What they'll do is they'll just get frustrated and angry, but there's no channel for them to go to pass on their frustration and anger. You can't just create an incident about that. So back to the expectation point, back to the the expectation. There's a couple of things I think, as Charles has talked about, people no longer are looking for just a quick fix. They're looking for help to make them more productive in the work that they do so that they stay employed at that company. But the difference is, I think, where we once would have said, you know what, if something's not working, contact the service desk. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I have applications on my computer that fail, that crash. Let's take an example, PowerPoint. Sometimes PowerPoint crashes. Roy, I don't know when you last had PowerPoint crash, but imagine you did. Did you phone the IT service desk when PowerPoint crashed? I bet you didn't. I bet you didn't because you had a more important thing to do. Yeah, you did not because you had something you needed to do. So when you do contact the service desk and you say, PowerPoint keeps crashing, I expect, as a user, I expect the service desk to know that it crashed 5 times yesterday and you didn't tell anybody. That's the difference. There's an expectation of knowledge. There's an expectation of context. There's an expectation that, you know, this technology is amazing. Why wouldn't you know that? Why wouldn't you know that it's been driving me nuts and stopping me work? Why do I have to come to you? Why are you not coming to me saying, you're having a rough time, let's make it smooth? That's, I think, is the expectation shift.
Yeah, and I think that really, I just want to follow on that quickly. That really leads into the whole idea of establishing those expectations up front, to look at what your end users expect and setting the move to XLAs from SLAs, right? And for years I've been talking about that because SLAs to me have always been a limbo contest. How low can you go? How can we set these levels so low that we'll never breach them? And the XLA, on the other hand, is a high jump. It's, okay, you have the expectations here. Let's see how close we can get to meeting those expectations or exceeding those expectations. And you're going to rate us on that, and we have to live up to what you expect. So there is a tremendous expectation on the other side of things as well. And as you said, users want to know, why didn't you know that this happened? Even more rudimentary than that, users want to know, why did you ask me that stupid question? You know which group I work for. You know where I'm located. What did you ask me that question for? You guys know this stuff. Why are you asking me? And that carries over into other areas of work too, like the contact center, Tim. Customers get very frustrated when you ask them really stupid things like, can you tell me your phone number? Well, it's displayed on your screen right now, of course. You know, is this the number we should call you back at? That would be good because that's where I am. You know, it's just, why do we do these things? Because somebody at some point thought they were important, and we have to reevaluate how all these relationships work, because things have changed, because we do business differently, we do our work differently, and it's different work that we're doing. And I think that once we start to realize how radically things have changed, then we'll start to really evaluate what's going on. And you know, that the days of the shoulder tap are gone. But unfortunately, the days of the Slack, Teams, and text tap are here, and we're dealing with those incoming signals all the time, and that adds to the complexity even more. So complexity's tough. Digital relationships have to be worked out.
Yeah, and I don't mind answering the question once, but when you know, something is handed off to somebody else because it's you know, either been elevated or there's just the wrong person initially, and I've got to answer that question again, that's where my inner curmudgeon comes out, you know, in full force. So moving on this one, we're going to start with you, Ian. Can you speak specifically to changes in how and where tech support and customers and end users are interacting, and have user preferences changed in terms of using automated systems for some interactions versus where they expect assistance from support techs, and getting back to a little bit earlier in the conversation, now self-service even more so.
Yeah, that's interesting as well, isn't it? Self-service. So traditionally, when you talk about self-service, you start thinking about some form of portal as the first point. Now we'll come on to multiple channels. Obviously, you know, there are many channels that are being adopted, but traditionally a service desk, a support desk would have some sort of support portal. That does require the employee to visit that support portal. It does require them to choose to go into their browser, to click on the shortcut, or to type in the URL, to know the URL to type in, to get to there, to report something that's not right. And again, back to expectations, I think people are starting to lose the will to do that. They're starting to lose the will to find that site and fill in that form and type in what happened. And it's just slow and frustrating. So I think what we're starting to see, and the multi-channel piece comes in here, is people are embracing the potential of technology to communicate more quickly with greater context. Now, obviously, that leads into things like Slack and Microsoft Teams and conversational interfaces like that. But it also leads into faster communication. So the ability to ask questions, get answers as part of not only the support flow, but the pre-support flow. For example, I talked about PowerPoint crashing lots of times. Wouldn't it be great if some technology popped up and just asked me, hey, is everything okay? Have you got any issues we need to be looking at? Is everything all right? Is your Office suite working okay for you? Are you happy with your digital experience at the moment? And if I answer yes, then great, leave me alone. Don't interrupt me. Let me do my work. Keep me in the flow. And if I answer no, proactively reach out, find out more, ask more questions. So technology is enabling that sort of almost ad hoc communication to check the temperature, the digital experience temperature, the sentiment of users and employees as they're working as well. And that's non-reactive. I mentioned earlier about coming to the support portal, about having to create an incident, the reactive. It's increasingly becoming proactive, as I described, where these conversations are starting up to check if everything is okay. And I think that's a big shift.
Yeah, that's interesting. We're also seeing that certainly with remote support tools, starting to include things like video, so that, I can say, hey, can you show me the back of your router? I need to figure out what you did wrong. At least in my case, that's what they're going to be asking. Roy, can you weigh in a little bit on how that's changed in terms of how end users and tech support interact?
Sure. I think that end users have always had high expectations of their ability to get answers and help from service desks. That hasn't changed. But the speed at which they expect things to happen has changed. And that's partly a result of what I started talking about earlier, which is that rapid shift that happened during the beginning of our response to the pandemic. We were able to do things so quickly that user expectations are such that they want everything to happen at the same speed it was happening then. So one of the questions again is that type of response sustainable? And I'm not sure it is, but that's an important consideration. The channels that people have used have changed. People are much more used to using things like text. People are used to chatbots now, however awful a lot of them are. And that's a whole different area of discussion. But where we have some emerging technologies coming into play, like the ability to have that proactive assistance, that contextual assistance. Okay, now we've got a little bubble that pops up. It knows I'm working in Excel. It knows that Excel crashed 15 minutes ago. It knows that Excel crashed 15 minutes ago at exactly the point I'm rapidly approaching, right? That number of cells, that amount of memory consumed, that whatever the circumstances are. Now is a good time for something to say, is everything okay? And maybe you should consider, saving your work before it goes kafoof, which is the official sound it makes, by the way. So... And users are getting increasingly sophisticated too. I've heard of users infiltrating Teams discussions that IT has running, or and increasingly reaching out. Now, I worked at a service desk. I used to get phone calls from end users that would say, can you help me with this particular problem? You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to create a ticket with the first level, and then maybe you'll get escalated to me. I don't know. Let's see. but they would call directly because they were hoping that I would be able to take care of them right away. That's increasingly happening now. They're reaching out to people directly over multiple channels. Oh, you're in Teams? Okay, boom, I'm in Teams. Guess what? I can contact you that way. And they also expect the issue to be resolved at the first level, and their experience is impacted when they can't get an answer or resolve an issue rapidly. So expectations are higher, and speed is more in demand.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I'm having a little bit of PTSD, Roy, because not this past Sunday, but the previous Sunday, as I was wrapping up my analysis of the data we brought in with that survey, I didn't notice that the Excel screen that I had opened up to work in, my little, kind of sketchbook, didn't have autosave on. So guess what happened at about 10:30 on Sunday night with my deadline by end of day on Monday? It didn't just crash. I mean, all of Excel disappeared from my system. So yeah, those types of things are frustrating. They're frightening if you're on deadline, and all those things really come into play for everybody on a regular basis. Charles, one of the things that struck me during this part of the conversation is, we talk about digital transformation from this high strategic viewpoint a lot, but when it gets right down to it, these are the nitty-gritty things that are going to determine success and failure in digital transformation, it seems to me. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, that's a whole nother conversation. I don't know that most of what we're talking about is part of digital transformation per se, but I do want to highlight a couple of things here. I think that in that context, one of the challenges that I think we're having in this conversation is that you cannot divorce the support process from the overall delivery of service process. And here's what we all want. I never want to have to talk to a support agent or interact with a support agent again. I want everything just to work, right? So it is one of these things that is there as this sort of safety net, but part of what we're talking about here, and I call this, the immersive experience, is that to kind of Ian's point, I want all of this to be happening where I'm at, where I'm working. In fact, in the experience standpoint, we have talked for a long time now about omni-channel. Increasingly, we're starting to talk about channel-less. And the idea is it's meeting the customer, or in this case, the user, wherever they are. So whether that's in a Slack channel, whether that's in Teams, and ideally in this sort of proactive, but it's a super fine line, because you don't want to be interrupting that flow, as Ian is pointing out. You don't want to cross the creepy line, right? It's about interacting them however they are, wherever they are. And Roger Allen here put up this question regarding self-service, who likes scanning their own groceries. And I'd argue I do, because I hate standing in line. If I can make this process faster, it is a non-value added experience for me to go stand in line at a grocery. So I will choose self-checkout every time. But I fully respect that there's others that don't like that at all, right? My wife hates it. She will gladly stand in line, just like she's the person that picks up the phone and calls support. Me, I will spend an hour on an FAQ or searching a support site before I call, because I hate the scripting, right? It's like they're going to do the exact same thing I'm doing. I can do it faster. Now, that doesn't make one right or the other wrong. What it means is we have to meet the customer wherever they are and engage them however they want to engage. And so I know that there's a sort of momentum about how we have too many channels. I'd argue we need more. We need to almost obliterate the idea of channels and simply say we need to make it as easy as possible for someone to engage with us across the entire service pipeline at any point, whether that's requesting the service, getting support for the service, learning how to use the service. At any point, we need to just be there. It needs to be immersive and transient, and where they're not thinking about it, because that's the only way we're going to get to that sort of service experience that we can get to. Because for me, that's what I want. For my wife, you better have a phone number and you better answer it the second she calls, or trust me, it's not going to be a fun experience. But, so it's about finding that balance of where engaging them wherever they are, however they are. And I think if we can get there, but the only way that's possible is with the data and the intelligence layer to sit on top of this, to ultimately what really should happen is the technology becomes invisible. That we're eliminating those barriers, so we're engaging with people. And my last little comment here, which goes back to it, is that the safety net for all of this is not a script. In fact, I think every service desk, every customer service center should just take all their scripts and blow them up. Because the safety net is, if I have to get on the phone with somebody, what I want is to connect with a human. I want someone who's going to show empathy towards me and my situation, and not in the rote, I understand you're having a problem, I'm very sorry about that. It's like, engage with me, right? Because by the time I get to you, that's what I'm looking for. And so, and if you do that effectively, you're going to get a whole lot of latitude, because it's like, okay, I can breathe and somebody actually cares, then I can let some of this other stuff go. And I think that's, in this march to efficiency, and I've run service desks as well for, 20 years ago, I've built the first one. And it was one of the very first things I taught my team, is that the most important thing you need to do is make the customer feel heard. And if you do that, then we can figure the rest out, but you've got to start there.
Yeah, and I think that goes for the bots as well. I mean, I'm constantly shouting, attendant, operator, and they don't listen. So this ties, I think, directly into what we were just talking about. Maybe there's a little bit overlap. But Roy, as you're working with clients, both in terms of solution providers and tech support providers, what are you hearing about specific tech capabilities that are either missing or inadequate? So we've talked about some of those, but are there any others in terms of the current iteration of tech support tools? And are those requirements or wants being reflected as solution providers are putting together their development roadmaps?
I'm hoping that somebody's working on this. There's a very specific thing I've heard from more than one organization. And it was described by one director to me as the ability to nudge. And by that, they meant they were referring back to being able to be in the same office with somebody and just reach over and say, hey, can you help me with this? Or have you run across this? And that's one of the things that kept bubbling up when people were talking about their experience in working remotely, working from home, whatever. But it even goes beyond that. Overhearing something for the third time in the same day, which happens in contact centers, that happens at service desks when you're in the same room. It's like, wait a minute, I just heard somebody talking about a printer problem in that area of the building 10 minutes ago. Do we have another case going on here? What do we need to look at? Are they related? Sometimes we find out that they are, and we can react in a broader way than just trying to resolve things one off. And that's a very interesting thing. Having a tool, for example, that could create a word cloud based on the interactions on multiple channels, something like that would present that. Oh, boom! Look at that printer just got bigger on my screen on my word cloud. Maybe that's something we should be looking at. And also the ability to collaborate better. And, we have tools that we can work on at the same time, but to collaborate real time on issues that are coming in would be extraordinarily useful in places like contact centers and service desks. And I think that some of that technology is coming. I'm hearing at least rumors to that effect. So being able to do that better, and pardon me, but I don't think it's going to be better to have avatars sitting at an imaginary table. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I don't think that's any different from us sitting here right now and having a discussion. And as a matter of fact, I know Ian. I don't know Ian's avatar unless it's a ukulele. So, but having the ability to interact in multiple ways with each other and make it as close to the experience of being able to reach out and touch somebody would be a good thing from the perspective of many organizations.
Yeah, I think that the real-time aspect of that, also the proactive aspect. So if, it's the same problem is cropping up across an organization, then, why not have a message that goes out, hey, we're hearing a lot of problems with this organization. If you're having this problem, please get in touch and that would be extremely, extremely useful. Charles, what are you hearing in this regard?
Well, first of all, I'm actually very bullish on conversational AI, particularly when it comes to support and employees. We've got a relatively known set of intents a relatively known set. I can authenticate a user so I can know their environment. I think the pump is primed for a massive explosion in this, and what it actually leads to is, I think, the bigger context here. And I look at, for instance, at NextThink's technology as in the same sort of category here, is that I think in most cases right now, the technology is not the problem. The technology capabilities that are available out there actually exceed most organizations' ability to consume them in their present state. Because the challenges are not so much, I can go and, and buy NextThink or buy a conversational agent and employ it. But the next mile, the last mile, is the most important, and that is the cultural transformation that's necessary to actually learn how to leverage it effectively, right? It completely changes the way you start engaging with organizations, being that sort of data first and empathy first sort of position. And I think that's actually the biggest challenge. The technology today, I think, is growing by leaps and bounds in terms of capabilities. It's a question of being able to afford it, particularly if you're a smaller organization, and if you're a larger organization, being able to deploy it at scale and actually changing. And as being someone who doesn't specialize in the service desk or even ITSM anymore, I can say this without being too worried about being yelled at. I think that there's a bit of a gap here in that there's a whole lot of historical anchoring to this is what our function is. This is why we exist. This is what we do. And being afraid to let that go and to re-envision what this process looks like. Because I think in the end, it becomes much more holistic, much more integrated. I'm not saying that we don't need a service desk, but I think the nature of what that service desk is doing is going to change dramatically. And that's going to require a complete sort of uprooting of the historical foundation and the processes that drive it. And that's, I think, going to be the big barrier, not the technology.
Great. Ian, without putting you on the spot, obviously we don't want to ask you to reveal, sort of what's specifically on the roadmap for NextThink. But what are you hearing from customers in terms of the types of features and functionality that they'd like to see?
Yeah, I mean, if we look in the context of tech support, digital experience management tools like NextThink have the potential to bring things to the support flow and experience that have not been possible before. And to achieve the sort of things that match the expectation that we've been talking about, what a support analyst needs is understanding. And understanding means data, as in an understanding of what has been happening, not what the situation is now, but what happened earlier, what happened yesterday, what was happening in the background that led to a situation I need to investigate. They also need understanding of the sentiment of the employee, the user. Because you know what, they might have had Roy may have had PowerPoint crash 10 times, but he may be really, really happy with his digital experience. Whereas Charles may have only had it crash once, but boy, is he mad. And we need to bear that in mind. That's part of that contextual view. You need to know that as much as you need to know not only what the situation is now, but what has been happening. The other thing I'd mention, something I think that's made, partly driven this big shift beyond service management and into digital experience is the power of automation. So automation starts to step in, and Charles was talking about bots and AI, and being able to know things is very important. Being able to do things is essential. So for an issue to be identified and corrected before it impacts the employee, how cool is that? Or if there is an incident that comes in, if there is a ticket that needs to be worked on, why shouldn't there be 4 or 5 standard fixes that have been applied automatically because that particular ticket was created with a particular categorization before it arrived with Roy in the first line position? Before it came to him, 1 fix, 2 fix, 3 fix, 4 fixes run through, and then it's presented to Roy. This is what's been done. This is the history, this is the sentiment, and even understanding things like Roy borrowed his teenage son's Bluetooth headset for that important Microsoft Teams sales call yesterday. And that call went really badly, and the quality of that call was really bad. Now, who holds that data? Well, Microsoft do, or Zoom do. Is that part of Roy's digital experience? 100% that's part of it. And if we can use that data and proactively say, here's our little pop-up again, we talked about a little bubble, what's sometimes referred to as digital adoption. Hey, you know what? You probably shouldn't be using your son's Bluetooth gaming headset. You should be using one of these 3 recommended ones. Not only that, we've put one in the post for you already. And that's the sort of thing that starts to come together when you bring historical data, when you bring sentiment data, and when you bring multiple sources of data with a digital experience context into the support environment.
Yeah, and I think that really points out the importance of not just knowledge management, but integrated knowledge management, where it's really tied very, very tightly, not only to your internal systems and processes, but also your partners. Because as you pointed out, the problem may not be something I can handle. It may be that we've got to get the Microsoft SME onto the case. So that sort of integration across knowledge management is very, very important. Excuse me. Back to the tech support employee or agent experience. Almost every support solution provider has something to say about how they're using or planning to use artificial intelligence in their products. My own view is that much of what's being talked about doesn't really reflect where AI can provide the most value today, which is helping organizations make plans and decisions and adjust to changing externalities, and then 2, helping to train, coach, and upskill tech support teams rather than simply automating tech support functions. And Charles, I know you've written extensively and spoken extensively on the impact of AI on tech support. Where is the AI having the biggest real impact today, and where does it hold the greatest promise in the near term? And I guess finally, what won't AI do now or in the future for tech support organizations that perhaps some people are expecting it to?
Well, I actually probably disagree with you a bit here. But before that, I'm going to play politician and answer the question that I wanted you to ask me. And it's actually a quick, first of all, shout out to Simone Moore, great friend, I think, of all of us, actually. And so hello, Simone, good to see you on here. But I actually want to answer Judy's question, because Judy brought up a question about how to get leadership to understand the value of the experience when maybe they don't care. And I think it's actually related to this, because I think that these all go hand in hand. And that we can't talk about the value at a leadership level. We can't talk about how to effectively use AI until we ground in the ultimate objective. What are we really trying to achieve? And so we have to start by the fact that ultimately every organization is seeking to do one thing, and that is to compete in the marketplace. And whether we couch that in terms of shareholder value, or we couch that in terms of market share, or we couch that in terms of social good, whatever it is, whatever your remit is, that's what you're ultimately trying to achieve. And everything gets anchored from that. To answer Judy's question, therefore, we have to start connecting those lines. As we talked about, every organization is in a battle for their customers and for their employees. So and we all know, and there's tons of data, both like survey data and studies, as well as anecdotal data. And I haven't talked to a single executive in the last 2 years that doesn't inherently understand this, that the ability of delivering an experience that differentiates you in the marketplace, or differentiates you in the marketplace for your employees, is making the difference. The trick, therefore, is to take these more tactical things we've been talking about today and connect it to those results. How? By delivering these technologies, by transforming the way you provide support, you are going to have higher levels of employee retention. You're going to have lower levels of customer churn rate. You have to connect it to these metrics that are business relevant to link it all together. And that leads back to, now I will answer your question about AI, that I am bullish on conversational AI in particular, and specifically around deflection rates in support, because it serves the customer most effectively. Because I can deploy literally 1 million conversational agents sitting out there to handle all that low-hanging fruit, to answer those questions. And now the trick here is that they're not all created equal, and you have to have ones, and I believe not only with clear intent recognition, but multiple intent and multiple resolution activities, right, where we're actually being able to dissect in plain English what someone's talking about and not have a bot-like response. I've got a new report coming out on conversational AI, and there's only a handful of systems that are doing this today, but the technology is catching up, right? So that, to me, is the first most important use of it, because it allows us to get, so if it's done right, solutions to our customer as fast as possible in the most immersive way, right? Because I can embed those agents in Slack, in Teams, on SMS, in WhatsApp, anywhere I want, and they can get that help where they need it. The second one is, as Roy mentioned, the in-ear, on-screen whisper agent that is saying not only here's the solution to the problem that you're saying the customer is saying they have this problem, here's an answer, or the customer's talking about this, here's the data, to Ian's point, that we're pulling from different systems that's probably related to this, but also the emotive aspect of it, the listening agent that says, hey, you're talking too fast, slow down. Hey, this customer's just raised their voice decibel. They're agitated. Maybe you need to try this, right? Where we're giving them some additional support and cues, because we all get in those moments where we get frustrated and whatever. And so I think we look at it, and this is the greatest application of where AI can help in a support context. And I think we're pretty much there from a technology standpoint, at least with some of the players.
Yeah, we used to joke that my sister-in-law's picture is probably on the break room wall of every supermarket in the general vicinity, because you don't want to mess with her. If she comes to you with a problem, you just fix it.
So yes.
Ian, what are your thoughts on sort of the state of AI in tech support?
Yeah, I mean, these things all go through waves, don't they? The waves of hype, and then it settles down to the reality, let's say. And I think with AI, we've been through the big wave of hype. And a lot of what was talked about over the last 3-5 years around how everything was going to change with AI and machine learning, a lot of that hasn't come through. A lot of that didn't come to pass because it's hard, because it's difficult, or sometimes because what it's showing you is only slightly more valuable than what you could have worked out yourself. But there are some things that have really landed and are grounded in big changes and big benefit. And for me, it comes down to data, actually. Charles is talking a lot about the conversational side, but to introduce that conversation, to guide that conversation, and to drive the action with the conversation, the potential of AI is to look at that big set of data and draw conclusions from it. So be able to say, this is a device where the employee is trying to do things not suitable for that age of laptop, that configuration of computer. We recommend they should have a different device. Why shouldn't that be part of the support experience, where you can look at that sort of profile and make recommendations? Don't just fix it and resolve it, but offer to change their working experience. I think that plays a big part of it. What you also get with that, of course, is when you look at large amounts of data, very often, of course, we're talking about that being run on a cloud model as well, naturally, from the vendors such as Nextthink. You're looking at cloud platforms where there is lots of data from many organizations from which enormous value can be pulled, where you can say, you know what, yeah, Roy's had PowerPoint crash 5 times in the last month, but actually you're in the 1% best of organizations in terms of your PowerPoint crashes. Maybe you should focus your attentions in other areas where you're less I'll say less good compared to other organizations, where you're struggling and they're doing great. And again, that's where AI can start to come in analysis of massive data sets that can help you in decision making and decision support. And just a final
thing. You've had a rough time with PowerPoint, Ian. That's all I can say.
Or Excel.
Apparently,
or Excel.
I'm having a tough time.
One very last thing, I'm going to do what Charles did and answer another question as well. To Judy's point about how do we get leadership to understand something I've seen, how do we get them to understand customer experience? I've seen a couple of cases where using a digital experience score, so you're able to give every employee or every user in an organization a calculated digital experience score, and you can correlate that to things like, these people have left. They left our organization. Look at their low digital experience score. Look at the cost of rehiring somebody. Let's invest in raising that digital experience score, and they won't leave. And you can use that sort of connection to guide that conversation.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And I think if I can,
yes.
Can I jump in there for a second? Because that's something I think we've all known that for a long time. Is if we pay attention to how employees feel about their work, we have a much greater chance of hanging on to them, and that's going to save us money. It's the old, what if we train them and they leave? Well, what if we don't train them and they stay? It's that, what is their experience like, and how does that help us? And I think that is absolutely of concern now, and hallelujah. And that might be another a knock-on effect from the pandemic, is that we've learned to pay more attention to it now. And with everybody working remotely, as you said earlier, and other organizations can reach out and grab your best people. and we need to be careful about that.
That's great. And Roy, assuming you're not a deep fake, what's your view on AI in tech support at this point? And briefly, because we are getting down to the last couple minutes here.
There are several things that are going on. AI-based coaching is absolutely really good, and I could have used that on a number of occasions. For example, when one of my team members remoted into a machine that was being used by a Nobel Prize nominated scientist whose number one dislike was getting their machine remoted into. It would have been good to get that coaching up front that, no, don't do that. Analytics everywhere, awesome. Combining that with the in-ear on-screen coaching, the data analysis is huge. There's so much dark data in organizations. It's just more than half of the data that organizations have, and they have huge amounts of data, is dark. I've seen estimates up to 80%. If you can get in there and start looking at that, and start looking at what's going on, listening, for example, to all those recorded phone calls that your organization, that your contact center has, and analyzing that data. What are your customers talking about? How many times have they mentioned your competition? What are their frustrations? Same thing you can do for your end users. If you're recording even a small percentage of the conversations that your service desk is having, and if you're not, why not? Analyze that and see what the topics are that keep bubbling up. Make that word cloud that I was talking about earlier. See what the topics are that people are talking about. The visibility can be immense, and you get the right answers and provide better service. It doesn't happen automatically. It takes work, and I think that's part of the problem, is that the industry, to a certain extent, has oversold the capabilities. So it's the shiny thing. Click the button and everything will be fine.
I mean, it's not that it's oversold, but it does point to what we sort of skipped over in this conversation, is the importance of both machine-generated data and data quality within the service desk to capture it so that we do have good data to work with. And if we aren't paying attention to the data, then none of what we're talking about makes sense.
Right. So we are just about out of time. We have one question. I don't know if you guys have a thought on this. And it's interesting to me because a friend of mine works for a company that recruits and dispatches truck drivers. And one of the biggest problems they have is as you're going to get somebody on board, they have to have access to a computer. They have to have some idea of how to use a computer. And it creates a real problem. And Simone's question was, how are organizations helping to provide support and immersive experience on an accessibility level where not everyone has the same tech landscape or a reduced tech landscape, but they still are dealing with this digital reality that we live in. Anybody have a thought on how do we sort of even the playing field for, I guess, the less tech savvy? I think that's what Simone's asking.
That's an entire webinar right there, I think, frankly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard to answer that in 60 seconds, but I mean, the short answer is that's why I think mobile is the new frontier around all of this, because everyone has mobiles. They are smart. We have a lot of capabilities that are mostly still untapped. And so to me, that's the short answer, but how to do that is a very complex answer, story.
Sure. I'll jump in with a quicker just point on that. Just because it's mobile isn't only the answer. It's still got to be a good experience. They may only use a tablet, but it's still got to be a good experience on that tablet.
Sure. Roy, any thoughts there?
Agreed. Mobile everywhere, and employees and end users are every place. Meet them.
Right. So we didn't get to the end of all of our questions today, gentlemen. You'll recognize that since I shared them all with you ahead of time. But this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate it. And I can tell from the, some of the comments in the Q&A that our audience really got a lot out of it as well. So thank you, everyone in the audience who joined us today. Thank you. A huge thank you to Charles, Roy, and Ian. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation again and touching on some of those topics that we weren't able to dive deeply on. And thanks again to NextLink for sponsoring today's session. So, gentlemen, thanks very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.